When we last left off, Absalom had claimed the throne of Israel and had sought advice concerning what to do with his father. He had ignored the advice of Ahithophel and instead followed the advice of Hushai the Archite, who was secretly working for David. Hello, I'm Knight Jake, and welcome to Bible Wars. This episode begins in the second book of Samuel, chapter 17, verse 24, but will mostly follow the events in chapter 18. After crossing the Jordan River, David and his men travelled to Mahanaim, near the river Jabbok. That morning, Absalom and his huge army of men from around the nation crossed the Jordan in pursuit of David. Absalom had appointed Amasa as general of his army. Amasa was the son of an Ishmaelite named Ithra, also called Jether. His mother was Abigail, the niece of Joab, the commander of David's army. When David was at Mahanaim, he was greeted by Shobai the Ammonite, Machir, and Barzillai the Gileadite, who brought to him supplies to feed his army. When the men were well fed and hydrated, David mustered his army and organized them for battle. David divided his army into three, 1/3 under Joab his commander, 1/3 under Abishai, Joab's nephew, and 1/3 under Ittai the Gittite. David agreed that he would fight alongside his men, but they urged him not to, and so David conceded not to go into battle. David stood at the gate of the city of Mahanaim and watched the men go out to war. As they went, David urged Joab and Ittai to be gentle with Absalom and not to harm his beloved son. And all the men heard David give this command. So that day the men went to war, and the battle was fought in the Forest of Ephraim. This location was chosen by David's men, for it granted them strategic advantage. The forest was thick and wild, and on that day the forest killed more people than the sword did. And in the battle of the Forest of Ephraim, the army of Absalom was defeated by David's men, and 20,000 men lay dead that day. Absalom happened to run into David's army. He fled, but as he fled his mule went under the thick branches of a great oak tree, and his head was caught in the branches. And he hung there in the tree, his long hair tangled in the branches as his mule continued to flee. One of the soldiers spotted him and called out to Joab. Joab scolded the man for not taking the advantage to kill Absalom while he was trapped. Joab said that he would have rewarded him with a belt and 10 silver pieces if he had killed Absalom. But the man knew that David had urged Joab not to kill Absalom, and so the man had faithfully told Joab, hoping that Joab would take Absalom prisoner. The man rebuked Joab, reminding him of David's command to not harm Absalom. Joab brushed the man aside, and taking 3 javelins with him, he thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive. Then Joab's 10 armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, and making sure he was dead, they struck him down. Then Joab blew the trumpet, declaring victory over Absalom. And the men of David ceased their pursuit of the men of Israel who had supported Absalom, and they returned to Joab. They took the body of Absalom, and they threw it into a great pit in the forest, and they filled the pit in with stones and made it into a grave. All the men of Israel who had supported Absalom returned home in defeat. And with that, we end our series on Absalom's rebellion. Join us next time as we begin another series on another Bible war. Thank you for watching this episode of Bible Wars. If you enjoy the Bible Wars YouTube series or any of the other work done by the Order of Knight George, you can support us by going over to our Patreon page. I'll leave a link to our Patreon page in the description below. Goodbye and God bless.